We live in a world that gives us many different messages about marriage. We see high divorce rates. We know that more people get divorced in the first year of marriage than ever before. We know that many people are choosing to delay getting married or choosing not to marry at all. So is marriage lost its importance for us? Does God have a plan for marriage? And if He does, or He did, maybe it worked in biblical times, but does it work today? Or maybe the problem isn't with God or His plan. Maybe the problem is us. Maybe we've taken marriage in a direction that God never intended it to be taken. I believe with all my heart that there is only one foolproof formula for successful marriage, and it's by the number one authority on marriage, the one who created it, who gave it to us a very long time ago in the Garden of Eden, with the very first man and the very first woman, the first husband and the first wife. That's what this course is all about, to teach you God's plan for marriage and to show you how to make that plan work for you. Is it easy? Not necessarily. Is it worth it? Yes. First, it can keep you from becoming another marriage casualty. But even more important, second, it can give you your very own awesome marriage. I'm excited to welcome you to session 1 of Preparing for an Awesome Marriage. Today we're going to look at the question, what is marriage? Let me tell a bit about our story. Nancy and I got engaged when she was 19 and I was 21. We were both in school at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas. Nancy was a freshman and I was a junior when we met, and it was a blind date. Nancy's best friend and my roommate set us up. We were both a little hesitant because neither of us were really crazy about blind dates, but we decided to go anyway. So at that time at TCU, there was a freshman girls' dorm, and they had ours, and they had a desk monitor. So when you went to get your date there, you went in and you asked the monitor to call up to the girls' room, tell her that her date was there, and have her come down. So I was standing in the lobby with a couple other guys who are waiting for their dates, and the elevator door opens, and out comes this really, really cute blonde. And she walks over to me and she says, "Hi, I'm Nancy. You know, I was usually pretty good on dates, but something about this girl was different, and I acted like an idiot. In fact, I acted like an idiot for the entire date. It was probably the worst 4 hours of her life. When I took her back to the dorm, she told her friend that she would never, ever go out with me again. But then, the first miracle in our relationship, in 2 weeks, she, for some unknown reason, changed her mind. She wanted another date with me. I got my second chance. And this date, it was different. It was very different. I wasn't going to blow it again with this girl. So over the next 2 years, we dated, and our relationship grew. It wasn't perfect, but I knew that this was the person that I wanted to marry. 2 years later, we were husband and wife. You know, our first few years of marriage were mixed. We were figuring out how to live with someone of the opposite sex, and it was much easier probably for me than for her, really. There were a lot of good days. We had a lot of fun together, but we were truly best friends. But we had bad days, and this pattern of fighting and not talking to each other for a few days, and then missing each other and doing it again and again, and then another fight would come. And we repeated this cycle over and over, and each time it chipped a little more away from our marriage. So Nancy was 26 and our son was about 6 months old when she started really struggling. She decided that maybe it wasn't God's will for us to be married because she wasn't as happy as she thought she should be. So while she was going through this time of struggling, I just wanted things to be better. Nancy sought out this strong Christian lady in our church. And she told Nancy told this lady that she had a friend who was having a hard time, and she was really talking about herself. And she told her that her friend felt that she maybe made a mistake when she got married. And this wise lady said, you know, once you make that covenant, that commitment before the Lord, He will bless whatever you take to Him. And it isn't God's intention for anyone to divorce. If you give it over to Him, He's going to make something beautiful out of that. So Nancy came home and told me this story, and I was so excited. And at that time, we took divorce off the table. We never put it back on. Were things perfect? No. But with divorce off the table, we had a new commitment. Whatever we faced, we had to work out together.
So we're a blended family, and I have an 11-year-old son now, Kale. We have an 11-year-old son, and I split up with his mom when Kale was, 6 months old, 7 months old, and so he's known Mel as Mama Mel for his whole life, and we've been married for 9 years, but the in and out court battles, custody situations, just flat out arguing for no reason, have put a lot of tension. There was a lot of between us on how to deal with it, and it was really crazy how we seemingly were on the same side of something, but it turned towards we turned it towards each other, and it was really, if I can be honest, it was really unhealthy. At the very beginning, I didn't deal with things the way that I needed to deal with them.
I didn't know how to deal with them.
Yeah, she didn't. Yeah, and it was one of those things to where blended family issues are so much different than traditional family issues. There's so many more moving parts. There's a whole lot more emotion because of the moving parts that there are, and it really exploded in a lot of different ways. I would choose to be a part of battles that I didn't need to be a part of, and
to make us argue.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It was just that. It was how we went to court. We've been to court 4 times. Mm-hmm. 3 of the 4 were the first 5 years, and it was hard.
It was definitely, one of the things that I always say is that if you're taking steps towards God, and especially in a marriage, the enemy is going to use whatever he can to attack it. And he used this in a situation. Sometimes he even used my emotions that I thought was really good things, and actually turned it on its head. And so I was actually choosing things that I thought were noble and good, but were actually contradictory to our relationship. And I actually see the end of that. And it's really awesome when in those situations, God will remind you of what is most important, because there were times that I was putting Kale over our marriage, and I didn't recognize that in the middle of the thing. I would say, you know what, Kale doesn't have anyone to defend him. I've got to go to him first. And that's not the way that God intended marriage to be, is he's my number 1, and she's my number 2, and my kiddos are, 3 and 4 and on down from there. But I definitely had things out of perspective and out of order, and God brought healing to that. Just in a reminder of, when you say yes to this covenant before God, he will constantly remind you, if you're in tune with the Spirit, of what's the most important.
Well, and he's faithful too. I mean, the 4th time we went to court, we got sole custody of Kale, and that was what was necessary. And the healing that we had done through that was evident when we had, it wasn't like, yes, so we're going to show you. It was just, okay, how can we extend grace to his mom now?
Right.
And how can we get her better? And how can we make this situation what it should be? And so we took all of the really hard stuff, and some of it, financially, we're still recovering from that. So that was a challenge too. And having to wait to have Asher because of that created a lot of animosity. But when we did decide we were ready to have kids, God was faithful, and there wasn't, thankfully there was no difficulty getting pregnant, which I was worried because I was an older mother, if you will. I was 35 when I had him, but and just the restoration between us and between Kale and between us and his mom, even though it ebbs and it flows, for the most part, it's pretty healthy right now.
Ours were, year 7, it's when Amanda got sick, and some psychiatric hospital time she had to spend in there to get better. Babies, 4 kids at that point in time. So that story's been shared through Awesome Marriage, but I know for us, what God has done through that was probably the most remarkable thing, seeing our marriage continually get healed, and to see our family continue to get healed because of our focus, but our willingness to pursue and not just stop. And we could have quit. I don't know what the percentage is, but most marriages don't survive something like that. And God allowed us, and by his grace continues to allow us to go through that. So that was the most difficult thing at this point in time we've gone through. But the end run was what we learned the most from that, was his grace and mercy and pursuing him in the midst of all of that.
I think that's good. I agree. Honestly, the first 5 years were great for us. I know every couple is different, but it was that year 7 mark that Colby was talking that was a huge challenge. And so what comes to mind during that season is the vows that we said on our wedding day, for better, for worse, for richer, poor, in sickness and in health. That was the year we always lived those out, but now it's that challenge was so hard. Are we going to live this out? And so, we did. Colby, it was sickness. There was no health. It was all bad. And he continue to pursue me and our family and the health. And so we made it through that challenge. And just like Colby said, I mean, completely the Lord sustaining and giving grace and strength through a really hard season for us.
So today let's talk about God's plan for marriage. We're going to look at a Christian model for understanding marriage. In the Bible it says, for this reason a man will leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. So God did have a plan for marriage. He had a plan for the husband and the wife to marry, to separate from their family of origin and their single life. So let's look at it. Let's go back to the very beginning when God created everything. And he created man in his own image. And he and man and God had this amazing relationship. The man's name was Adam, and Adam was able to name every animal that God brought before him. And then at one point, God looked at Adam and he said, it is not good that you're alone. Until he had Adam go into this deep sleep. And he came and God took a bone from Adam's side and he formed woman out of it. And he brought her before Adam. And here were Adam and Eve, the first husband and wife, the first man and woman ever in the first ever marriage. And God, out of his goodness, placed them in this incredible, lush place called the Garden of Eden. I mean, I don't know if we can imagine how beautiful it was. If you think of the most beautiful place you've ever been and multiply it thousands of times, maybe we might get close, but it was lush and beautiful. And then God came every day to spend time with them. God and the husband and the wife, Adam and Eve. And God said, you can do everything. You can take care of everything here. You can eat of everything here except this one tree. And I don't want you to eat of that tree. And the Bible says the man and his wife are both naked and they felt no shame. Think about that. What do those words, naked and unashamed, mean to you? I mean, sure, the nakedness is great, but the no shame? I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? To be open, transparent, honest, and that was God's plan. That was this perfect relationship between a husband and a wife. So things were great, and then Satan comes on the scene. And he comes to Eve and he says, Eve, why are you not eating off the fruit of that tree? And Eve says, because God told us not to. And Satan says, God told you not to because if you eat of it, you'll be like him. And so Eve takes a piece of fruit and she takes a bite. And then the next part of the story really bothers me because I wish to find Adam, she had to go somewhere in the garden or go find him in the house because he's watching ESPN or something like that. But he was right there and she just turns and gives it to him. And Adam takes a bite too. And then in the evening, God came for his time with them, and they were not there to be seen. And God calls out, Adam, where are you? Now, God definitely knew where Adam was, but, Adam says, I was naked. I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. Then everything changed. The relationship between God and man changed. Man went against God. Man sinned against God. And God placed them outside of the garden. But this is what I want you to hear. What they had, Adam and Eve and God have, is what God wants with us in our relationship. He wants the husband and the wife and God right in the middle. And I believe so strongly that through our relationship with Christ, we can have this. So let's look at some marriage facts. Let's look at some of the facts about marriage in our culture today. The stats may vary, but there are a lot of divorces every year. Most research says that about 50% of marriages will end in divorce or separation. Does that scare you? Well, it scares me because marriage is a serious, serious commitment. But listen to this. The divorce rate for couples who regularly pray together and regularly read the Bible together is less than 1%. Let that soak in. Pray together, read the Bible together, less than 1%. God's plan works. So let's talk about some premarital fantasies. What are some of your fantasies that you have about marriage? For women, it's kind of like they want the Cinderella life. She wants to be swept away by the prince and live happily ever after. It's usually for women a lot about romance. For guys, it's wanting a companion to do things with and have sex with. Marriage adds reality, I think, sometimes to our fantasies, because sometimes the qualities we see in someone that we're attracted to before marriage can become a problem in marriage. For example, Nancy was very independent, and I liked that when we were dating. But when we got married, I didn't want her to be independent. I wanted to take care of her, but it didn't work out that way. I now had to figure out how to accept who she was as this independent woman and learn how to embrace that in our marriage. As you think about your fantasies about marriage, think about where they came from. For most of us, a lot of it came from our family of origin. That was your textbook growing up. A lot of them come from culture and the media. And then to think about those, okay, we have these fantasies. Are they realistic? There may be qualities that you value now in your future spouse that could become a challenge for you in your marriage. And that's not a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of. Differences either separate us or draw us closer together. And embracing each other's differences will draw us together. And that's what God wants. So let's look at some warning signs to be aware of as you go into marriage. If you fit one of these, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't marry. It's just a sign that you need to be aware of it. And maybe it needs to be addressed. The first is the family background of each spouse is significantly different. I mean, you're going to be different, but how different is it? And as you look at the background, are there some red flags that come up? Next, a couple is dependent on either family financially, physically, or emotionally. In other words, you've got to start your own family. You've got to be totally independent of other people. Next, a couple marries after less than 6 months of dating or more than 3 years of engagement. You got to spend enough time with the person you're going to spend your rest of your life with to know them. You got to go through the seasons of a year with them. And yet, if you're engaged for too long, that can become very, very frustrating. The wedding occurs without family or friends present. Research tells us now that couples that marry with family and friends present have a greater rate of success than couples who don't. So you need the support of the people near you. Next, a wife becomes pregnant before marriage or within the first year of marriage. All of a sudden, you're dealing with 3 people instead of 2 people. And that third person is going to need all the attention. You don't have the time to develop what you need to do in your relationship. So you're going to have to be very, very intentional if you find yourself in this situation. Either spouse considers their childhood an unhappy time. You know, sometimes we bring baggage. If you had a rough childhood and you haven't worked through that, it's important to do so you don't bring that baggage into your marriage relationship. Either spouse has a poor relationship with their siblings or parents. In other words, if you've had some bad, important relationships in your life, and if those haven't been resolved, I often see those things crop up later on in the marriage relationship. So if there's some baggage, it's really important to deal with it so you can move on. Next, marital partners in either extended family were unstable. Remember, that was your model. So if you grew up in an unstable home, you got to be aware that a lot of what you had modeled wasn't a good portrayal of what a husband and a wife should be.
I don't necessarily think of them as a warning sign, but I know that we definitely looking back, things that we could have done better was setting expectations. Her expectations for what she wanted to see out of our marriage, and especially in the future, 10, 12, 15 years down the road, what were our expectations at that point in time? And we didn't quite have those set. So when things happened that we thought, in her mind, this is what things were supposed to look like, and they weren't going the way that they weren't, I had no idea because my expectations were completely different than what hers were. So I know for us, those were things, maybe not warning signs, but what we could have done a better job of communicating through or talking through to help us better prepare for marriage together was setting those expectations and being clear about what our future expectations were.
Yeah. Honestly, I say the same thing. There weren't big warning signs for us.
No.
So
I wish that I had paid more attention to, it kind of deals with the custody stuff. I wish I'd paid more attention to the level of toxicity between Doug and Kel's mom. Not because I wouldn't have chosen it, but I would have surrounded myself with people that went through it, with Christ-following, strong women that were part of blended families that I could vent to, that could have given me advice, that could have prayed with me, and that could have helped me to help him have a more Christ-like perspective in certain situations, because certain things would happen and he would get mad and then I would get mad and it just exploded. And I think had I had someone to walk alongside me, I maybe could have helped him and it would have helped us overall. So I wish that I had really dove into how much better I could have been as an influence if I had had the support of other women that were going through it.
Yeah, warning signs for me actually were, I mean, really for myself, of I wish I would have seen the warning sign of what an idiot I was to see that she was flirting with me years and years before we actually got together. But you know, God brings us together in appropriate timing and things like that. But you know, I really wouldn't call it a warning sign, but for me, something that I wish that I would have looked at earlier on as we were dating was the communication aspect of how important that is, because while I believe I'm a good communicator and I'm good at facilitating relationships, there's something different when it comes to a marriage of being able to sit down and literally bare your soul with someone that you're going to spend the rest of your life with. And I wish that I would have seen a better opportunity to dive into that sooner and better and really make that a priority, if that makes sense.
Get some questions to ask before you marry. Is God at the center of your relationship? You know, God created us with certain needs, and there are needs that He intends to meet for us in our marriage relationship, and there are needs that He intends your spouse to meet. But if I expect Nancy to meet needs that God was supposed to meet, I'd be in trouble. It wouldn't be fair to her, and I'd be putting her in a very difficult position. The same as she did that for me. So if you put God at the center of your relationship, then God can meet the needs that He intends to meet. Then as a spouse, you can meet the needs that you can meet as a husband or a wife as God equips you to do those. Second question, do friends and family support your relationship? I mean, you want that support and need that support, because marriage is a lot of times, it's very tough. You need the support of those who care about you. Number 3, you have common goals and values. Kind of the whole idea of leaving and cleaving. Are you willing to leave the single life? Are you willing to leave your parents and cleave and join up with this person for the rest of your life? Can you set goals that you want to achieve together? Are your values close enough together that you're on the same page? Next, you have cultural differences. If you do, how will they affect you? You know, I've seen the blessings that can be in a relationship like this, but you have to be aware of the differences. So if that's an issue for you, look at those differences and see how they're going to impact you in marriage. Next, are you free from past relationships? If you've got an old boyfriend or girlfriend that still hangs around, it's time to get rid of them. If there are things that happen in those relationships that you didn't get resolved, you need to work that out within yourself. We tend to sometimes frame our husband or wife from a past relationship. I'm a man, so it would be very easy for Nancy to frame me, maybe in a way that was based on another person she dated. Maybe I would say something like that person said, or I might have a mannerism like that person did, but I might mean something totally different from what that person would mean. You want to make sure that you're able to look at the person you marry totally as who they are, unique and separate from anybody who's been in your life before. Last question, why do you want to marry this person? You know, there's an old Jimmy Stewart movie. I love Jimmy Stewart. I love this movie. You may not know who Jimmy Stewart is. You probably may not have even heard of the movie, but it's a great movie. It's called Shenandoah. In this movie, Jimmy Stewart is the head of his family. His wife has passed away. He has 5 sons. He's got a daughter. And it's at the beginning of the Civil War. And Jimmy Stewart owns all this land, which is called Shenandoah. Well, in this scene, Doug McClure is a soldier that comes to ask for his daughter's hand in marriage. And Doug McClure is already just kind of messed up by coming into the room, by all the brothers stare him down and leave the room, and then he falls over this ottoman and he's sitting down. So he's finally sitting down with Jimmy Stewart. And Jimmy Stewart, in the way that he does, kind of looks at him. And Doug McClure's kind of nervous, and he said, I'd like to marry your daughter. And Jimmy, he kind of looks down, and then he looks up at Doug McClure, and he says, why? And Doug McClure's just taken aback, and he says, well, because I love her. And then Jimmy Stewart looks at him for a second, and then he says, that's not good enough. He goes on to talk about how important it is to like someone, how liking someone can get you through many of the hard times that come with marriage. It's a great scene, a great point. Loving is great, and liking is so important. So I ask you again, why do you want to marry this person? Love for a lifetime. John 16:33 says, in this world you shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Apply that to a marriage relationship. In marriage, you're going to have problems. There's no getting around it. Marriage isn't the storyline from Cinderella, but Jesus says, be of good cheer, because Jesus has answers that we won't have anywhere else. Jesus has overcome the world. He's got a plan for your marriage. He's got a plan for your life together. And if you put him at the center, you've got a great chance of achieving it. And also, marriage doesn't just happen because two people are Christians and love each other. You have differences, your background, things we've talked about in this session. You've got to have God to help you deal with those differences, to keep you together, and to be the focus of your marriage. Let's pray. Father, as we begin this journey together, Lord, help us to see that you do have a plan for marriage. You have an awesome, amazing plan. And when we embrace that, the difference it can make. Amen. One of the most important things you can do as you go through each session is to do the homework. My suggestion is that you set aside some time together each week for the two of you to go over the questions, talk about them, and interact. If you look at the questions that follow this session in your workbook, they're on marriage and family. So take the first question. If you guys agree on it, check it off. If you don't agree on it, circle it. Then go through all the questions and then come back to those you've circled. Talk about them. You'll find that you learn a lot more things about each other, and you'll talk about a lot of things that will come up in marriage, and you'll get a chance to deal with them on this side of the altar. Next, we'll talk about your roles in marriage as a husband and as a wife. We'll see you then.
When you know